As promised, here is the much more intense setup. Now it looks extra intense because I've got a lot of stuff open on one screen, but fear not, I will talk through all of it. And I want to show you three things. The main thing I want to show you is the more advanced output with direct routing that lets you export, in this case, 10 things with one click. And that's going to be stereo stems and surround stems and stereo and surround mix simultaneously. And I've added some M&E tracks in there just for fun. But the other two things I want to show you is how to use the Alt and the Shift modifiers nicely. And I also want to show you how to set up one of these mix consoles to look different to what it does by default. And you can see I've got two of them open here. So let's start with the key modifiers, and for that I'm going to use our audio connections as an example. So F4, this is already set up, so I've got my output buses, nothing's connected, and then I've got my control room. Now remember, with your outputs, when this is connected from 1 to 6 by default and you want to make them all not connected, rather than clicking on them one by one, you've got an alternative solution. So we've covered this before, and the key modifier is Alt and Shift. So if you have multiple stuff selected, like multiple tracks, if I just click on the R button for the DX track, that's the only one that selects. But if I hold in Alt Shift and click, they all select. Same for input and output, and the same applies in this audio connections menu. So if I want to deselect all of these simultaneously, I select them all, and then I go to the first one and Alt Shift click, and none of them are connected. Now what you would have done previously is go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individually. And that's the other key modifier I want to show you. If you just hold in Shift, rather than selecting the same output for all of them, which it won't let me do here because you don't want them all to go to the same output, you want to cascade them. And for that, you hold in just Shift. So all of them are selected. I go here, I hold in Shift, and I click on 1, and now it's cascaded them from 1 to 6. Another use case for this, say you're recording 6 mics at the same time, you've created your 6 inputs here, you go to the 6 tracks that you've created, and then you select them all, hold in Shift, set the input 1 on the first one, and then it'll cascade up to 6 for the other ones, which is quite useful. But this is now set up correctly, so we can hear stuff and export things. So here's our blitz tone. Now you'll probably hear this on YouTube, so no surround sound for you, so you'll get a stereo mixdown of that. So do look at our meters disclaimer. I just threw together random stuff I found on the computer to make this so that there's signal in different places. So it's really not a coherent mix. I've got a DX track, which is Yaku's voice.
Join us from 7 to 11 December.
I've got an effects track, which is some French meadow crickets, and it's panned a little bit further back, so we just get signal coming through front and back. And then we've got an LFE, which is just some random thumps over here. And then we have got an organ, some close mics on a random organ recording. And that again has been panned so that it's more to the back than the front. I'm lying, it's more to the front than the back. So those are your tracks. Here is this non-mix put together.
Join us from 7 to 11 December for free career Join us from 7 to 11 December for the free career guidance week for late runners to register for 2021 intake before we close for 2020. I don't understand any of that shit, man. Okay, I was just reading it. Good luck understanding that. For late runners to register for 20 intake before. Free career guidance week. I'm just going to say that. Like, that's all you really need there. I mean.
So let's trace where things go. Now you'll see I've got these mix tracks here, my blitz tone and my other audio content. And then I've got group tracks. I've got a whole set for 5.1 surround, and I've got a whole set for stereo. And you can also notice right at the bottom corner here, I've got my master stereo out and my 5.1 out. Now, this top mix console, these are my mix tracks and my blitz tones and my input and my control room section. And the bottom mix console, those are my 2 sets of group tracks and my output buses. So it's split up like that so you can see what's going on. And you'll notice rather than just having DX, FX, and MX, I've got this fourth stem called M&E, which is music and effects, which is just these two put together, which is quite a common delivery requirement. You might also have something where you have everything except music, and then the same logic applies and in terms of how I've combined these tracks. So let's trace how they're going through. Another thing I want to point out to you first is in my channel settings here, I have enabled both these options, direct routing and output chain. Now the output chain adds extra faders here and it makes the screen look very busy. I usually don't have this on, but this is a nice way for you to trace from track to output what it goes through. And in some cases, it is actually a useful thing to be able to mix stuff here and get to panners. But I'm just using it today to show you the routing. But let's start with the DX track. And that is my DX track. And you can see over there, it's going to my 5.1 DX group. Over here, 5.1 DX group. Pretty simple as before. Now, previously, this would have gone to the submaster and then out. But now this one goes directly out to 5.1 out over here. So track to group to 5.1 out, but it also simultaneously goes to my stereo DX group. So there's my stereo DX group, and then the stereo DX group, that is a direct out to my stereo out. So if I play a short snippet of this dialogue, have a look, you're going to see it go through these stages. Now, what you see over here, that is the most direct, the main mix output. So it doesn't show you all the different direct routing, but you can see DX track to 5.1 group to master 5.1 out. And then the alternative, the simultaneous route that it also has is out through the stereo group. So have a look at this, all the different meters that's going to light up.
For late runners to register for 20 intake before.
And you can see on my surround track, it is panned to the center with divergence. So you're getting strong channel 3, slightly weaker 1 and 2. And for stereo mix, it's just a combination of those two. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated for effects and music because we've got these M&E tracks. So the same applies for effects and music, what I'm going to show you now. So for my effects track, that first goes to the 5.1 effects stem. So there is the effects stem. But that doesn't go out directly to my master output yet. That first gets routed here to my 5.1 M&E, and it's the M&E that then goes to the 5.1 out. But you may have spotted it not only goes to my M&E track, it also goes to the stereo group. So effects track to 5.1 effects directly to M&E and out on the one hand, and directly from 5.1 effects to stereo effects. And you can imagine over here, then I first jump to stereo M&E, and then the stereo M&E goes to stereo out. Bit complicated, but you set it all up like this and you'll see the export is going to be like a dream. So music is exactly the same thing. Music goes to 5.1 music, that goes to 5.1 M&E and out, and it also goes to stereo music, then to stereo M&E, and then stereo out. And my LFE, as I told you, that routes the same as the stereo effects over here, or my effects tracks in general. So those are the group tracks, and I want you to see how this is now going to behave when I export. And that's the real strength behind setting up stuff like this. I have set up that this DX track goes to a stereo DX bus. Now, this might sometimes be mono if you really just have dialogue in the center channel. But because I play around here with a bit of divergence, I'm going to keep it as a stereo track. But if you wanted mono dialogue for your stereo groups, then this one would be set up as mono. And I sometimes even see mono DX groups as an only DX group, the only DX group that you have, because there won't be any other effects of panning. But the moment you spread that DX wider, then it makes sense to have a 5.1 stem over here. So I've got this range selection with my blitz tone and my non-mix over here, and I am going to go to export Mixdown. And this, if you're just on single, obviously you can choose one of these many things, but now if I go to multiple, I have all of these selected. So it's going to export all of these 10 things simultaneously. I've set up those names, so if you use your naming batch naming scheme here, you can change stuff, go play with that. And I'm just exporting to my project folder. I've called it random for this random mix. And have a look, when you experiment with this, if you had to do this one by one solo in groups, it would have taken you literally 10 times as long, because it doesn't export them one by one. It does some clever processing or usage of computer resources so that it goes much quicker, especially for longer projects, which you'll find if you export an hour-long movie. So this should all be fine, but the thing that would be off by default is after export, it usually says do nothing. But now I'm going to say create a track. So all my exports are going to be imported straight back into this project. And that's something that you could consider doing right at the end when you export stuff, because it's a nice thing to do a visual check of your waveform. You can very quickly see if channel orders are incorrect, if an LFE is missing, if some section is silent or clipping or something like that. So now we're going to have 10 files. It's going to be intense, but it's good practice to do that. So let's export. You'll see how quick it is. There, it's exported and it's imported all of these into tracks here. So let's minimize this and actually make the screen a bit bigger so that you can see our 10 automatic mixes here. You can see stereo, you can see that's a stereo mix. Surround, that's got all the content there. DX, only front 3 channels. Effects, a little bit of content there with my LFE. Music, just those channels. Music and effects. You can see that's a combination of these two. And similarly for my stereo stems. So there you go. Very easy to do it like this. Going to delete these guys again. And then the last thing I wanted to show you was how to set up a Mixconsole to use its zones and other features properly. So I've got Mixconsole 1 and 2 here. In this version of Cubase, you get 3. So if you head to the studio menu, I'm going to open Mixconsole 3. It might look slightly different for you depending on your settings, but you can see it's just got all my tracks on the left-hand side here. It's got color coding, so input and outputs are red, groups are blue, other ones are kind of gray. And I've got my control room here, which you can switch off. But what I want to show you is this visibility and zone setting here. Just to go indulgent, I'm going to add all the different top layer things here. And you can also resize stuff. Now, this is quite nice for a second screen to have everything open. Now, I want to set this up so that my inputs, so that my mixed tracks are on the left, my groups are in the middle, and that my outputs are on the right. Usually I'll have my outputs and my groups on the right and everything else on the left that lets me scroll, but here is an example of how to do it. So if you go to this left zone, if it's not showing, enable it over there. And then you've got lots of different stuff, but visibility shows you what you can see. And these little chevrons form according to your folder and subfolder structure in your project. And if you untick it, it doesn't show up. So I want to not see my mic. I'm not recording right now. And then I'm going to head over to zones. And in zones, this is where you can have the left, center, or right zone. So I want my mixed tracks all to be on the left. Here I've got my groups. They're all in the middle. And I want my output tracks on the right-hand side. And now when this whole thing is smaller, it keeps the left and right visible, and so you can scroll through all the other ones there. That's why I usually have all my tracks scroll and my groups stationary on the right-hand side. And depending on your monitor layout, you might want to have these fatter or wider. Now, that's a bit cumbersome, but it's useful to be able to do. If you go to the function menu here, there's zoom. So you can increase channel width. So if you want fatter faders, I think by default they look about like that. You can make them much wider, but I usually, if I've got lots of tracks, like to reduce the channel width so I can fit things into a smaller part of the screen. And then you can hide this guy again. So you only have the tracks showing up where you want them, somewhere on the screen. Lots of other features here too. I don't use the mixer all that much, but it's useful to explore Mixconsole in detail.